Kia ora, talofa malo, everybody. Welcome to Church Online. Fantastic that you're with us. Love having you connecting in for church today. Well, I know you're going to love this message because it's coming from our lead pastor, Pastor Scott Thornton, who I know always brings such an impacting, God-relevant word in season for every single one of us. So we're going to be hearing from him today. So why don't you lean in, engage, and let's connect with this message right now.
I love when it comes to focusing on, God, what do you want to do in and through me in these 3 weeks? And we have looked at what God wants to do for expansion these last 3 weeks, but what God wants to do in and through us doesn't end on week 3 of expansion. God wants to do something in and through us every day of every week of our life. He wants to shine His love and bring His hope to your sphere of influence and my sphere of influence, not just 3 weeks a year, but every week of every year. My son, who is in year 9 at school, is doing a class called DGT. I wish they would just call them simple names, but they don't. It's called DGT. It's called Digital Technology. And he came home maybe, 8 or 10 weeks ago, and he was so pumped because he got to design something and print it on a 3D printer. And I came home one day, and there's this little hexagon cup-looking thing that is sitting on the counter, and he texted me and said, "Dad, what I made in DGT is sitting on the counter. I'll tell you what it is when I get home." So I get home and I look at it, and I start to think, oh, look, it was pretty cool. I'm like, well, I wonder what this could be. It could be one of those the little kind of feet that go on the bottom of your dining room chairs. I don't know about you, we've got wooden floors, and we put those little sticky pads underneath so it doesn't scratch the wooden floor. They last about 5 minutes, and then there's scratches. I'm like, this kid's a genius. He's made little cups that sit on it, and they'll never fall off. And I'm like, nah, that couldn't be it. And then I know that he knows that his mum loves candles, and it was the perfect size to put a tea light. You know, those little round, one of those little, I'm like, that's exactly what it is. So before he got home, I put a tea light candle in there, and I lit it, and I put it on the dining room table for him to come home, and he's like, "Dad, what is this?" I'm like, "Bud, I'm using your candle holder that you made for your mum." He's like, "It's not a candle holder. It's a pill dispenser." I'm like, "Who do you think your mum is?" He's like, no, I watch mum every morning take her vitamins, and she has to undo the lid, and I thought I'd make 8 of these, and then she could put every day's vitamins in it, and then there'd be a lid on top of it. And he's like, I know there's only 7 days in a week, but I made the 8th one, so on Monday she could refill the next one. She never runs out. I made her a pill dispenser. That's what it is. I'm like, "But I think it'd be better as a candle holder." He's like, "Dad, listen to me. I made it. I know what it's for." And in that moment, I thought, how often does the Father in heaven look at all of humanity struggling to find purpose and goes, "If you just look to me, I made you. I know what I made you for." The psalmist said, "I knit you together in your mother's womb." You have a personality because He know what He made you for. You've got giftings because He know what He made you for. He wants to use us every day of our lives on purpose when we discover why the Creator made us the way He created us. I love what Colossians 1 verse 15 and 16 says. It says, Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. You want to know the character of God? Get to know Jesus. And He is loving. He is patient. He is kind. He is generous. He is arms open. He is not angry and stingy and religious. He is relational. Jesus is the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before anything was created, and Jesus is supreme over all creation. For through Him, God created everything in the heavenly realms and on earth. He made the things which we can see and the things which we can't see, such as thrones, kingdoms, rulers, and authorities in the unseen world. Here's the part I want us to get today. Everything and everyone was created through Him and for Him. Not someone's, not most people, everything and everyone was created through him and for him. Friend, you were created by a loving God and for a loving God. Your current day-to-day, whether you are in a mountaintop or a valley, whether you are celebrating or whether you are mourning, you were created in this moment by God and for God. He can use you in any circumstance when we live with a revelation of, I don't have to manufacture my own purpose. I can discover it through the Creator who created me. Here's today's big idea. Jesus is the main character in my story, not me. Hello? In 2024, where we live in a culture of look after me, get for me, what was in it for me, how do I get, what do I get for? Jesus is the main character in my story, not me. A few weeks ago, I was at a cafe and Amanda and I were with some people and I got up to pay. I go to the register, which was at the front door, and as I glance over, I look at this couple in the back corner of the cafe. It's a full cafe, and they're standing up and they're waving. And when you do what I do and you're up here, sometimes you find people who recognize you, but you struggle to place them. So I just assume, okay, they're part of church. That's what I assume. That's every time I assume. So they're in the back there waving. I'm like, I give it a little wave, and they start waving harder, and I start waving harder, and he stands up and is like, and I'm like, oh, this is awkward, and waving a bit harder, and we have this thing going on which felt like, you know that minute meet and greet you'd had? It felt like 3 minutes of those where I'm like waving, and I'm like, Amanda's there, I don't know what she's doing. I'm like, save me here, babe. Like, do something, go and talk to them, do something. They're waving really hard, and I realized when I turned around, they weren't waving at me, they were waving at a couple standing behind me. You ever accidentally made yourself the focus of a story? You ever walked into a room because you're having a bad day or an insecure moment and thought, I wonder what they're thinking about me? Reality check. They're not thinking about me. They're thinking about them. And when we live with this revelation, it's not actually about me. It's about God using me to shine through me so people don't see me, but they see him. Here's the question today. Who's the main character of our story? Is it me or is it Jesus? Does my life exist to point those around me to the same God I've discovered? Or do I have a tendency from time to time, like I do, to make me the center of the story? When Colossians tells me I was created by him and for him. I love what the Apostle Paul says in Romans. He says, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true, proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing and perfect will. Paul basically boils life down to two choices. I can either live a life that tries to look after me and make me the center of the story, or I can live a life that takes every opportunity. My parenting, my going to work, my playing sport, my living in my neighborhood, my whatever I am doing, I can take every opportunity to use my life to let the God who created me shine through me so that those around me can discover the same God that I have discovered. God wants to use you. Don't disqualify yourself. Yeah, but I haven't got it all together. Welcome to the club. Yeah, but I'm still a work in progress. Welcome to the club. God wants to use you in your today, in your journey, to shine a light through us to him. The pattern of this world says this: when you sacrifice and surrender, you lose. The pattern of Jesus is when I sacrifice and I surrender, I gain. That when I lay my life down, that's when I truly find life. In fact, he puts it this way. Jesus puts it this way in Matthew chapter 16. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if any of you wants to be my follower, You must give up your own way. Take up your cross and follow me. If you try and hang on to your life, you'll lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? You and I were created to be a part of his story, to live in his pattern, to be part of. I love what Pastor Luke said on last week's expansion video. He said, when I play my part and you play your part, we're woven into the same tapestry of faith. That God is doing something beautiful, and as we say, God, use my life, I get to be part of his story here on the earth. My oldest daughter, who's 23, is getting married on the 6th of January. My youngest is getting married on the 8th of November, by the way, so if anyone needs a kidney, I've got one for sale. Just see me out there, I will sell it to you. But she get married on the 6th of January. She lives in Australia, and she goes to our Adelaide campus, and she is marrying little ginger rocket. His name is Bowen. He's awesome. I love Bowen. Thank God that my daughters have found great men. Church, parents, if you have kids who are yet to discover their life partner, pray now. It makes a difference. It makes a huge difference. So we go over to Adelaide and we get to meet Bowen's family, and we take them out for dinner, and we meet Bowen's parents. Little did they know I was interviewing the family at the time. I had a whole bunch of questions that I'm ticking off to make sure that I was going to entrust my daughter to them. But we're sitting there, and Catherine and Graham, Bowen's parents, they're both school teachers. And I begin to hear their story. Graham's been a school teacher for 25 years, and his whole drive and his whole journey was to become a principal, and he wanted to kind of climb the ladder and get through and do that. And then as we're sitting there, that day he had accepted a new job which was outside of a school. He'd accepted a job where the local hospital, Adelaide Hospital, employs a teacher to journey with kids who are in hospital for a long time to make sure they don't fall behind on their studies. So if there's a young person in hospital for over, I think it was 2 weeks or a month, if they're in hospital for that long, then Graham gets the chance to spend time with them every day to help them create a plan so that they don't fall behind on their education, and that becomes another issue when they get through their hospital journey. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, man, that's amazing. What an amazing thing to do. And he's like, Scott, I'm not there to give these kids an education. Like, I'll do the maths and I'll do the science and I'll do all that sort of stuff. He's like, Scott, what I'm excited about is these kids are sitting in a hospital day after day getting bad news and bad prognoses. I can come in with the light of Jesus and bring hope and encouragement into their day. I can come in with who I am and what he's done in my world, and I can bring encouragement. Friend, that's not reserved for school teachers. That's for any Christian who says, God, use my accountancy, use my plumbing, use my parenting, use my sport, use anything that I've got to shine through me to bring light and hope wherever I go, because I was made for God, by God, and I was made for God. Matthew 16 in the Message says this, then Jesus went to his disciples and says, anyone who intends to come with me has to let me lead. You're not in the driver's seat, I am. Don't run from suffering, embrace it. Follow me and I'll show you how. Self-help is no help at all. Sacrifice is the way. It's my way to find yourself, your true self. What kind of deal is it to get everything you want but to lose yourself? What could you ever trade your soul for? I don't know about you, but the journey of my Christianity has been times of trying to get God to fit into my story. And then there's been times where I'm reminded I'm a part of his story. Whatever's going on in my world, God, you want to use it for your good. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says this, trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. The Bible is full of heroes who found themselves in situations where they had to decide either I'm going to try and work this out, or I'm going to align my life to God's plan. Think about Abraham and Sarah, who were given a promise that Abraham would be the father of many nations, find themselves at 90 years old, no kid. Man, imagine at that point, you're like, nah, I don't know if this is going to happen. Abraham had a few wobblies in there, like he tried to make it happen himself, but then he aligned his life and said, God, I am made by you, for you, and God had his way, and we are now all descendants of Abraham. If you've been in church long enough, you'll know the song, Father Abraham has many sons, many sons. Terrible. But you get the point. Abraham said, God, I am made by you and for you, and we're all here because of it. What about Joseph? Joseph had a dream that he would use his God-given talents to influence the world for good. And then his brothers throw him into a pit and sell him off. I wonder what was going through his mind at that point. But Joseph chose to align his day-to-day with God's will. And in the palace he shone. And then in the prison he shone. And before you know it, he became prime minister of the land and was able to do what God had called him to do. Why? Because he aligned his day-to-day, regardless of circumstance. He said, God, wherever I find myself, I am made by you and I am made for you. I love the story of Ruth. Ruth is a lady in the Bible who did exactly this. She said, God, I'm going to give up control. I'm going to lay down what would be easy, and I'm going to embrace what you've asked me to do, and you have your way. If you don't know the story of Ruth, let me give you a quick recap. There is a couple called Elimelech and Naomi, and they were Israelites living in Israel, and Israel found itself in a famine. So Elimelech and Naomi and their two sons moved to a neighboring country called Moab. They put roots down and they start to do life and they start to hang out. When your kids move to other countries, and they do the same thing that my daughter did, they found spouses and married them in Moab. So the two sons found Moabite women and they married them, and life was good for Elimelech and Naomi and their two sons and their daughters. One of the daughter-in-laws was named Naomi. After a period of time, the father and the sons pass away. In those days, that was tragic because your sustenance and provision came through the head of the house, which would be the father. And if he passed away, that responsibility fell to the sons. Now the sons have passed away. You've got a widow and two daughter-in-laws who are in Moab. They are the most vulnerable of that time. So Naomi hears that back in the homeland, the drought has broken. So she pulls her daughter-in-laws together, of one of which is Ruth, and says, hey, I'm going to go back to Israel. The best thing you can do is stay in your home country, go back to your family, believe to find another great man, get married, and God will provide for you. One of the daughters did exactly that. But Ruth says to her mother-in-law, Naomi, I'm not going anywhere. Where you go, I will go. Your God has now become my God. Your people are my people. Ruth decided that I was made by God and I was made for God. I'm not jumping out in a tough time to take the easy route. I'm going to stick with what I believe God has called me to do. God, give us a generation of people who in the tough time and the challenging time have the ability to stick with what God has called us to do. So Naomi and Ruth move back to Israel, not knowing how it's going to play out. They meet a man by the name of Boaz. Boaz is a wealthy man. And through a series of interactions, he takes a liking to Ruth and marries her. And in marrying Ruth, he restores all of the physical possessions that they had lost back in Moab. Boaz is known as what is known as a kinsman redeemer. You might be like, what the heck is a kinsman redeemer? A kinsman redeemer back in those days was very common language, and it was anyone who paid someone else's debt out of their own wealth. Remind you of anyone? Jesus, who came to earth, paid all of humanity's debt. Anything that would separate us from God, Jesus paid that debt and restored us back into relationship with the God who created us. Friend, today, when we live with Jesus as the center of our story, then what God can do in and through us is not just for us, it is for generations to come. You know, in Ruth's story, she teaches us two things. I want to give them to us real quick. Number one, Ruth teaches us that when I choose to align my story with his story, I can trust that God will bring the right people at the right time. Ruth stayed with Naomi, and out of that she met Boaz. And it changed the trajectory of her life. Because when you stick with God's story, he brings the right people at the right time into your life. When I was 15 years old, my home was quite tumultuous, and my parents didn't get on, and there was physical violence and a whole bunch of stuff. And I started to think, man, how am I ever going to get out of this? How am I ever going to see anything different? And then I joined a church, and I got saved at that church. I got saved for the first time. I got saved multiple times in my teenage years. This was the first time I got saved. And in that church was a guy by the name of Michael. Michael was a milkman. And Michael said to me, hey, do you want a job? Come and help me on my milk run in your school holidays, and on the weekends, I'll pay you $12 an hour. At 15, I thought $12 an hour, I'm going to be rich. I'm going to be buying a house in a couple of weeks. This is my ticket out of here. I'm good to go. He said, see you at my house at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. 5 a.m.? Is it like time and a half for before 7 a.m.? Like, I get in the car at 5 a.m. the next morning, and there is worship music blasting. I'm like, it's way too early for worship music. But Michael would just make comments. He's like, hear that line? That's our God. Hear that line there? You should say that over yourself. And he just dropped these little comments. He did that for a couple of weeks, and then I remember a couple of weeks later I got in and he was playing preaching messages. He'd put his cassette deck tape into the cassette player. If you're under 25, look it up. He put his... And I'd get in there and I'd be like, a second message in a week? Good Lord, that's a bit much. I had one yesterday. I don't need another one today. And as we're driving around, Michael would be like, mate, did you hear that in the Bible? Did you hear that in the Bible? And over months' time, Michael deposited all of these God drops. And I remember it culminated one day where my parents had had a particularly rough weekend, and Michael only lived a few doors down. He knew that it was rough because he had heard it going on. That's how rough it was at my house. He'd heard it going on. So that day he said, hey, why don't we go and sit at the beach and have some morning tea? So we sat at the beach. And he then began to talk to me about all those little God drops that he'd dropped in, about the fact that I was made by God and I was made for God. That regardless of my home life, God could work in and through me and make a difference. And I am here today because Michael the milkman said, God, I am made by you and for you. I may be a milkman, but use my milk run to change someone's life. Friend, when you go to work tomorrow, you're not just a teacher, you're not just an accountant, you're not just a lawyer, you're not just a landscaper, you're not just a parent. You are made by God, for God, to use what is in your hand so that we are not the focal point of the story, but people look at us and through us and see the God who saved us. Let's live with a commitment. God, I am made by you and for you. And when that happens, the right people at the right time will come along. 19 years old, I decided to go to Bible college, and I'm still a mess. I'd still had all the stuff of my upbringing going through my head, and I'm dating this girl named Tracy Draper. If you're online, all right. Hope you're doing good. And I felt like, this isn't the right girl for me. We're on two completely different paths. And I remember the first week or two at Bible college, I made the decision to, as gracefully as I could, bow out of that relationship and say, God, I'm made by you for you. 6 weeks later, we're on an outreach trip in Lithgow, Sydney. We go into a school, and there is this girl singing an Alanis Morissette song. She's like 5'4" and beautiful. And she's sitting right over there. Listen, I am here today with any type of health and overcoming that God has graced me with, first and foremost because of Jesus, and secondly because of that lady. Don't chase relationships. Chase God. Now, when you're chasing God, have your eyes open, like be looking around. Go on a coffee date, for goodness sake. Do something, but don't have your goal to find a partner. Have your goal to discover and know Jesus better. And as that happens, He'll bring the right people into your life at the right time. Because when we trust in His timing, the right people at the right time come. Number two, when I trust in His timing, the right opportunities come. You know the band, come on back and join me. The book of Ruth ends with the genealogy of Jesus. Look at me. A Moabite woman. And if you know anything about the Moabites are not the people you want to come from. They are descendants of Abraham's mistake when he tried to take God's plan into his own hands. But a Moabite woman named Ruth, who married into a family, then was hit with tragedy, but said, God, in the midst of my tragedy, I was made by you and I was made for you, ends up in the lineage of Jesus because she made him the center of her story. You know, you fast forward my journey 25 years, and it would happen on a monthly basis where Amanda and I get the opportunity to sit and speak into other people's marriages where maybe they need some support and some strength. People that have been married a year, people that have been married decades, we get the chance to speak into. Can I tell you, every single time, I sit there and I think, God, you are so good. Because based on my story, I shouldn't be here giving anyone advice. But when you live a life that says, God, I am not actually the center of the story. You're the center of the story. I was made by you and I was made for you. So you can take any part of anyone's journey and you can bring hope and life out of it. There are people in church today and you've disqualified yourself from being used by God because you know your story. Friend, I got good news for you. You don't have to rely on your story. You can rely on His story out working through your story, and it can make a huge difference in people's lives around you. As we say, it's not about me, it's about the one who created me.
Well, I hope today's message really encouraged and inspired you. And if you'd like to know more about what it means to have a relationship with Jesus, then you can text the word Jesus to 9676, or you can check out the link below and one of our team would love to connect with you. We would also love to invite you to join us at one of our campuses on Sunday. It's a great opportunity to meet some people, and we would love you to be a part of our church community. So you can also check out the link for more information about where our campuses are. But we hope you have a really great week, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.